On the Pasuk Vayetze Yakov mi Be'er Sheva, Yaakov goes out of Be'er Sheva. The Medrash tells us that the words Be'er Sheva could also be understood as Be'era Shel Shavua, meaning to say he's leaving the place of the Shavua, of the oath. What does that mean? Yaakov was leaving because he wanted to make sure that he's not made to make a certain promise. Yaakov didn't want that Avimelech should force him, should get him to swear just like he had sworn, just like Avrohom Avinu had sworn, making a peace treaty with Avimelech. And as a result of that, causing my children, says Yaakov Avinu, to be delayed of coming into Eretz Yisrael 7 generations. Meaning to say, Avrohom Avinu made a promise to Avimelech, a treaty with Avimelech. As a result of that promise, that delayed the Yidden coming into Eretz Yisrael for 7 generations, as the Medrash explains in Parshas Vayera, that from Avrohom Avinu until Moshe Rabbeinu conquering SIcha and Og, that was 7 generations. Yitzchok also made a treaty with Avimelech, and that caused that the Yidden should be delayed another generation, because from Yitzchok until finally Yeshua conquers Eretz Yisrael, there are 7 generations, so they're delayed 1 more generation in addition to the 7 from Avrohom Avinu. Yaakov Avinu doesn't want that to happen again. He doesn't want to have to swear to Avimelech, delaying the Yidden coming into Eretz Yisrael 7 generations, in other words, 1 more generation, and therefore he leaves Be'er Sheva also in the sense, not only leaving the physical location, but also leaving the Shavua behind. He doesn't want to have to swear to Avimelech. So the Rebbe says we need to understand, since both Avrohom Avinu and Yitzchok both promised and swore to Avimelech, they were not concerned about the Yidden being delayed coming into Eretz Yisrael as a result of this promise. They did not leave the place where Avimelech was living in order to avoid promising and swearing to him. Why is it that Yaakov is afraid to swear to Avimelech, making a peace treaty with him, to the extent that he leaves Be'er Sheva, leaves the well of the Shavua, of the oath, so to speak, escaping in a certain sense, leaving not to have to make this promise to Avimelech. So that's the question on the one hand, why the Avos were able to make this Shavua, and Yaakov Avinu was afraid to make this Shavua. On the other hand, the question is, how does it make sense that Avrohom and Yitzchok did make this Shavua to Avimelech without being concerned that this is going to delay the Yidden coming into Eretz Yisrael? So the Rebbe says the explanation is as follows. We find that there's a general difference in the levels of Avrohom Yitzchok compared to the level of Yaakov. And based on this general explanation, we're going to understand the very fundamental difference between the avodah of Avrohom and Yitzchok to that of Yaakov. Chazal tell us that Avrohom yotza mimenu Yishmael. Out of Avrohom came a Yishmael, which separated, went different to the way of Avrohom. Out of Yitzchok yotza mimenu Esav. There's an Esav that came out, again departing from Yitzchok's ways. That means Yishmael and Esav, despite the fact that they were Bnei Avrohom and Yitzchok, nevertheless they left their connection from Avrohom and Yitzchok, from their avos, from their parents, and they separated from them. Meaning to say that the level of Kedusha of Avrohom and Yitzchok didn't touch, didn't impact these children, didn't cause that they should be transformed into good. However, Yaakov, we know that his Maila is mitase shleima, that all of his 12 children are complete, are tzaddikim. They are all complete in their connection to Yaakov and to Yaakov's level. Now, even though, of course, the avos, all of them are considered the Merkava, they're all considered the chariot, the vehicle for Hashem, the neshama of each one of the avos is from the world of Atzilus. Nevertheless, there's a difference between them. And also, in regards to their avodah, in how they deal with those things that are the opposite of good and kedusha. Yaakov was mainly involved in elevating and refining and transforming the bad to completely transforming it into a permanent good. Whereas Avrohom and Yitzchok, that was not the case, as we'll soon see. And therefore, even though Yishmael did tshuva, and according to someone, Esav runs towards Yaakov and goes and kisses him. According to some, he kissed him with his whole heart. And nevertheless, in both of those cases, this didn't last. Now, even though Avrohom and Yitzchok were involved in Avodas Habirurim, in dealing with the world and elevating the world, as the Razal say regarding Avrohom Avinu, Vayikra Sham B'Shem Hashem Keiloilam, that he calls out in the name of Hashem. And Al Tikra Vayikra Ele Vayakri, that not only he calls out himself, but he makes others call. all the people passing by his tent. He made them all call out in the name of Hashem, and so too it's explained in Chassidus regarding the avodah of Yitzchak and digging his wells, that it was all a matter of elevating and bringing up sparks and so on. Nevertheless, their avodah with dealing with the bad and the klipa was primarily by negating it, by pushing it away. In other words, making sure that klipa, or the negative forces, are not getting in the way of kedusha, but not that they themselves should be transformed into good and into kedusha. In other words, the whole purpose of their involvement with the ra, with the bad, was mainly in a way of negating it, making sure that these things cannot oppose to kedusha, but not actually completely transforming these things themselves. Just interesting to point out, to clarify a little bit more, that the Rebbe in Ha'ara 14 over here says that even though we find that Avram was being Megayer, was converting the men, etc., and the Rambam actually speaks about how Avram was bringing thousands and tens of thousands of people close to the Eibishter and so on, and nevertheless, there was no continuation to this, as the Rambam himself says, that the only ones that remained steadfast and connected to Hashem was only the Yidden, as opposed to everybody else. Again, it was more of a temporary thing, it didn't last. So that's all in regards to Avrohom and Yitzchok. Whereas when it comes to Yaakov, we say Vayelech Charona. He goes out into the negativity of the world. Charona stands for Charoinav, the anger of the Eibishter in the world. And there he comes, and he's doing positive activities to transform them and to turn them into Kedusha. Generally, this is a similar difference between the avodah of a tzaddik and the avodah of a Baal Tshuva. A tzaddik has no connection to Ra. Even a machshava zara, any foreign thought that's not part of avodas Hashem, doesn't even enter his mind, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya at length. Whereas about Shuvah, the idea is that he needs to transform the bad into Kedusha. And Zdoinois Nas like Kazachias, he has the ability to take those even things that were intentional Aveiros and transform them into Kedusha. Since the avodah of Avrohom and Yitzchok was not really about that the bad in the world should be completely transformed, like the bad in Plishtim by Avimelech and so on, rather just that his opposition was gone. Therefore, there is still some room left for the actual existence of the negativity even by their own children of Yishmael and Esav. In other words, there wasn't this idea of completely transforming negativity into Kedusha. In fact, we just said, Yotza Mimenu, that Ishmael and Esav left from having a shaykhus to the avodah and kedusha of the avos. On the other hand, as I said before, they weren't opposed, they didn't disturb, they didn't block the avodah of the avos, but not that there was some sort of transformation. But in other words, the very, very essence of the klipa, you can say that it was changed around by the avodah of Avrohom and Yitzchok. And therefore, we also can say that the actual concept of klipa is completely negated, because as far as Avrohom and Yitzchak are concerned, so to speak, there could still be a klipa in the world as long as it's not getting in the way of the kedusha. Like we find by Avrohom settles amongst the Bnei Ches. Yes, they do recognize that he is a Nasi Elikim, a Prince of Hashem, B'Soichenu amongst us. Nevertheless, they don't get transformed. It's not like they now became good. They remain with this title. They are still called B'nei Ches, even after Avrohom is dwelling amongst them and living amongst them. And the fact that they agree to giving the Maris HaMachpelah and selling the Maris HaMachpelah, again, it's just that they are not disturbing him in doing his avodah, but their very essence was not transformed into Kedusha. Again, back by Yaakov Avinu on the other hand, the whole purpose of Yaakov was to elevate, to transform, to purify even the worldly matters that are from Klipa and Sitra Achra. That means, as a result of his avodah, there's no room anymore for any Ra whatsoever, and that's what we say regarding Yaakov Avinu, that mitose shleima, that he has all children tzaddikim and so on. So now, getting back to what Avrohom and Yitzchak did make a bris, did make a treaty with Avimelech, and made a peace treaty with him as a result of the Shavuot, this promise. What's the idea of a Shavuot? What's the idea of the oath, of making this treaty? It's in order to make sure that each one of the two sides will not oppose the other, in its fullest strength. There will be no arguments, no fights, no battles, And this is exactly what Avrohom and Yitzchok were trying to achieve when they made a Shavuah with Avimelech and making that treaty with him, that he shouldn't oppose them and he shouldn't disturb them in their avodah. But on the other hand, this Shavuah and this Krisas Bris is not changing the very essence of Avimelech. It's not changing him to a Metzius of Kedusha. So that's as far as Avrohom and Yitzchok are concerned. But then comes the avodah of Yaakov, that since his avodah is about that there shouldn't be any klipa at all, rather there needs to be a transformation of the klipa in Sitra Achra. So there's no such thing that you can make a bris, you can make a peace, so to speak, with Avimelech, that Avimelech should stay who he is, and we're just making peace with him. So now we can understand what the pasuk says, Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'er Sheva vayelech harana. According to the Pirush that we said, Be'er Sheva means he's leaving this concept of being able to make a Shavuah. There's no way he's going to be making peace with the Klippa. In other words, that as a result of his avodah, he can't have any Klippa at all. So he can't stay in where he is as well, in a place where there's just godliness. What's his avodah? His avodah is Vayelech harana. In continuation to going out of Be'er Sheva, meaning that he's not going to be making peace with any sort of negativity. On the contrary, Vayelech harana, he's going to go into a place where Hashem's anger is there, and he's going to deal with it, to transform it, to bring it into Kedusha. Says the Rebbe, based on this, we could also understand why Avrohom and Yitzchok weren't concerned about making the Shavuot Avimelech, even though that would be delaying the Simcha of the children coming into Eretz Yisrael, because in truth, it's not about the treaty itself. It's not about the promise itself, which, as we said before, is related to their sort of avodah, is the reason why the Yidden are not going into Eretz Yisrael. Rather, it's when we say that there is this sort of avodah, that we're still making treaties with Avimelech, meaning to say that there is still some sort of ra in the world that we have to deal with in that way. It couldn't have been completely obliterated yet, and therefore, as long as there is some bad in the world, that's what's holding back that Eden should be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. It's not the technicality of whether a Shavuah was made or not. It's only after Yaakov gets involved with Charon, with Charon Avshal Mokim Ba'olam, and he deals with a Klipa and he transforms them into Kedusha. Now there could be the true Simcha of the children in their Geula and coming of the Eden into Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rebbe, the same thing is true regarding the Geula Hasidah. It's going to be specifically as a result of the Avodah of Yaakov. That because of our avodah in the time of Golus transforming the place where there's the anger of the Eibishter, we're going to be zoichet to the binyan beis hamikdash hashlishi, which is again connected to Yaakov, as the Gemara says. It's not like Avrohom, which by Avrohom Avinu the reference to the place of the beis hamikdash is called a har. Not like Yitzchok, where the reference is a soda, a field, which are both more representative of more temporary things, but rather Yaakov, which called it bayis, a permanent place, bevias Mashiach tzidkenu.